to day 2 of the MTSS Summit. My name is Maureen. I am on the Summit team here at Branching Minds. It's good to see you all back today, and we're going to jump right into the keynote for today. It's my pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Eva Dundas, our Chief Academic Officer at Branching Minds, who's going to get us started for day 2 of the summit and today's keynote with Dr. Paul LeMahieu. Over to you, Eva.
All right, thank you, Maureen, and welcome back, everyone. I hope you have had as wonderful of an experience learning from these speakers as I have, and I'm sure today is going to be just as enriching. So thank you all for, the active participation and involvement you've had over the past day, and if you were at the pre-conference then as well. Love to see kind of what everyone's been responding to in the chats, and it's been great to learn from you all as well. So today I am so very excited to introduce you to Dr. Paul LeMahieu. He is the Senior Vice President of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement in Teaching. He has also served as the superintendent for the state of Hawaii and has also held leadership roles in education research and policy for the state of Delaware and also at Pittsburgh Public Schools, which is close to my heart because I was there in Pittsburgh for about 10 years. I have been so incredibly inspired by the way that Paul and the Carnegie Foundation have been using this improvement science approach within school networks to help drive better education outcomes. If you were at the pre-conference, you could probably tell that here at Branching Minds, we're really excited about thinking about the parallels between improvement science and MTSS. So I'd encourage you to think about those parallels as well during the session today. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm really, really excited to see what you have to share today.
Thank you and good morning, all. I have increasingly been lately spending the time at the beginning of talks and meetings and so forth, spending a moment to recognize and take note with gratitude of folks with whom we're getting the opportunity to interact. And I want to begin that way this morning as well. I do want to thank you for the opportunity to share Carnegie's work. My ambition for this morning is to inform, to make aware, and also to hopefully encourage a certain level of interest, maybe even enthusiasm, and conclude with an offer of continued support and partnership. Carnegie is in the position of being able to provide resources and supports of a number of types. If there's interest, there's certainly a willingness to partner. I also want to thank everybody in the audience for the work that you do. I recently flew someplace and heard yet again appreciation expressed rightfully for the service members who serve the country and us. And I started compiling my own little list of folks who I would put on the early entry, early boarding list. And certainly among them would be educators, especially frontline educators, who get my nod for the people who do more with less every single day. And thank you for that. Before I start into my talk, I want to spend just a moment talking about what I'm going to talk about. And if that sentence didn't give you whiplash, we'll do just fine this morning. I'm going to talk about what we call networked improvement science, or more particularly, I should say maybe the networked improvement sciences, because the first thing I want you to know about improvement science is that it's not a single thing. It's not a program or a set of instructions. It's not the answer to any of your problems. Perhaps sadly, you hear that, but it is not the answer to any problem in particular. But it is an approach and a methodology for finding answers to your problems and supporting you in the address of those problems. It's also not a single approach, just as the sciences are no single discipline, but they are a family of approaches and a family of disciplines, but they're all bound together by certain fundamental principles of the sciences, and that's true also for the improvement sciences. But that also means that there are a number of people, a number of organizations, and a number of efforts that are genuinely engaged in what we think of as improvement science. Just to name a few, some of which you've probably heard, Lean, Six Sigma, and Lean in education, positive deviance, discipline-based improvement research, and I'll gladly welcome into the family of improvement sciences the work that Branching Minds does, as I've come to know it, because it shares many of the mindsets, many of the perspectives, and many of the core fundamental ideas that make something legitimately a science of improvement. Excuse me. And that's what I'm going to share with you, are the big ideas about just what makes for a science of improvement, in the hopes of intriguing and maybe even exciting you about that. There are two things I'd like you to know about the improvement sciences generally. The first is, as I said earlier, they're not a recipe to be followed. They are a set of tools and techniques and procedures for accomplishing certain things as you investigate problems, as you determine what the best course of action for addressing those problems might be, and as you go to work prototyping, testing, examining solutions to know what works for whom and under what circumstances, and then spreading what you learn so that the field can benefit from what you do. Those are all the hallmarks of a bona fide science, and that's true also in this case when we think about a science of improvement. The other thing that's important to know is that everything that I'll talk to you about has behind it, as you could well imagine, a lot of thinking and a lot of resources, tools, and processes. That's what a visit to our website might provide you if you have some enduring interests, and I welcome you to look into that. So specifically, what I hope to do is to spend some moments talking about the ways in which we have traditionally tried to solve persistent problems. How have we tried to make improvement happen in education over the last 50 years or so? And what has come that's been of benefit from those efforts, and what are their shortcomings? Why is it that we thought something else, something in addition, was needed? I also want to explore that alternative. Spoiler alert, that alternative, of course, is the science of improvement sciences, as we're here to talk about. And the third thing I want to do is I want to describe for you networked improvement communities. That's what NIC stands for, networked improvement communities, as distinct from other approaches to solving problems, because networks, professional networks, carefully structured professional networks, turn out to be a unique and appropriate human organization and context in which to do improvement science particularly well. So we're going to begin, as you'll hear in several moments, the very first principle of improvement science is to make the work problem-focused and user-centered. Everything we do when we do improvement science begins by understanding the problem. Just what is the problem? What does it look like? What does it look like from multiple perspectives? And in doing so, it gives us a solid foundation from which to actually hypothesize or conjure up or propose possible solutions. Well, I'm going to begin my talk actually with the study of a problem, and it is the problem of getting good ideas to work well in practice. Because what I'm about to share with you is a very, very common experience We've done a lot of research looking at efforts to implement even good ideas. And one of the things that we have learned is that they are challenged, and they're challenged in ways that are knowable and understandable. And if we do know and understand the challenges of implementing good ideas, it's possible to create an approach that encourages and allows us to implement them better. So I'm going to begin with a case study. I'm going to begin with an example. And the example that I want to look at focuses on reading recovery. I don't know how many of us know reading recovery, but there are 2 or 3 things I really want you to know and understand and believe about it. First of all, I should also note with gratitude that Reading Recovery has shared their data with us, has reviewed this summary of the case as I'm going to present it, and they have very generously allowed us to speak of this, and so we're grateful to them for that. I also want you to know that in our view, Reading Recovery is a very strong, it's just a very good, wonderful program. It's well conceived, it's well specified, and most importantly, as implemented, it tends to be one of the stronger programs in terms of supports for implementation. In other words, it is genuinely a good set of ideas around which there is a lot of good thinking about how to implement those ideas well. And yet, the experience that I'm about to share with you is what commonly comes of this case. The results come from the first year of a large randomized control field trial to see whether or not Reading Recovery is an effective program. $40 million invested in the randomized control trial that I'm about to describe for you. But again, as I say, a key thing to take away and realize is that Reading Recovery is, in our view, a well-specified and well-supported program. And in this case, they were implementing in multiple sites, 282, I think it is exactly, to be exact, schools paired up and then randomly assigned between Reading Recovery and a control condition. So what happened when they did this? When they did this, the very first thing that they saw was an effect size, an impact measure that was really quite significant and really quite strong. Specifically, it's an effect size of 0.7. Give me just a moment so that I can describe for you how to understand effect sizes, because we're going to look at a couple of charts with them. Effect sizes typically run from -3 to +3. They can go up further than that, but pretty much all the time they're between -3 and +3. And 0 means no impact. So if you had a 0 effect size, the control group and the treatment group, Reading Recovery and the comparison schools, would have come out at exactly the same amount of growth on the outcomes. If you get a positive number, obviously that means positive effects and increasingly positive effects as the number gets bigger. As you get a negative number, that means negative impact, that the control group actually had better outcomes than the treatment group. So that's all you really need to know about effect sizes. And now we can look at some of what happened. So in the first case, they got an average effect size of 0.7. The other thing there is one other thing to know about effect sizes, and that is from 0 to 3, they tend to be what we would describe as modest and not terribly interesting, perhaps not worth a major significant investment, but positive. From 3 to around 5 or 6, or 0.3 to 0.6, we think of an effect size as being moderately strong. And anything above 0.6, the statisticians have to take cold showers because these things are rare and they are extremely strong positive effects. So in this case of Reading Recovery, they got an effect size, a mean effect size of 0.7, which is really quite strong. And the typical response would be, it's a great success, let's go ahead and spread it. And in fact, if you know about the What Works Clearinghouse, it's what gets you listed in the What Works Clearinghouse, it's what gets you declared as a research proven practice or an evidence-based practice. And the idea about improvement would be, it's a research proven practice, let's just spread it. But here's what I want you to know and understand about this result truly. If you look at the entire set of 141 schools, it turns out that they are distributed around that 0.7, from negative values up to even stronger, greater positive values. And there are 3 things that I'd want you to know about this distribution. The first is, there are a number of cases, there are a number of schools in which the results were either no difference or negative impact in the comparison between reading recovery and control schools. So either no difference or negative impact. Almost 1 in 5 of those schools fall into that category. In addition, there's a similar group of schools up at the positive end doing extraordinarily well. These are what are called positive deviants by improvement scientists, which I think is a delightful name because perverts have been giving deviants a bad name for years and years. So they call these positive deviants because they are both positive and they are way out there in the distribution. They have a lot to teach us, but we tend never to learn it. They have a lot of knowledge that should be spread so that all can do better, but we tend never to capitalize on it. And there's a third feature of this distribution, maybe more important than anything else, that you need to know. And that is that this distribution is the exact same distribution, the exact same shape as these schools were in at the beginning of the implementation of reading recovery. In other words, what they've done is they've moved the entire distribution to the right, they've moved the entire distribution in the positive direction, but they have done nothing to reduce the variability. They have not, and so they end up with a distribution in which those that were behind are still behind. They're behind by every bit as much as they ever were before. They've done nothing to reduce gaps. They've done nothing particularly good to close gaps or to make sure that all succeeded, or to make sure that those who were the most disadvantaged and therefore often the faring least well are doing anything more than faring least well at the end of things. This is a very common, and I want to repeat what I said at the beginning. This is a program that we have a lot of respect for. It's a good program. It's well specified, it's well supported, and the implementation of this program was very well supported. And yet you get this kind of distribution, this kind of variability. You get this circumstance in which little changes for those who are farthest from opportunity and farthest from accomplishment. And you do nothing to reduce that variability or to close the gap that variability actually entails. And why is this so? This is so because the conditions on the ground, school by school, are very, very different. Local context matters, and it matters a lot. And if the people who are doing the research were being completely honest with us, what they would say in their report, and I can tell you it doesn't show up anywhere in their report, what they say in their report would be, this program can work. It has these significant positive impacts. And you will get results exactly like these as long as you do exactly what we did, and as long as you do it in exactly in places that are exactly like the places where we did it. And that's never going to happen again. There are no other places exactly like the places that they did this implementation. And that's the uniqueness of local context. So what we have actually from an improver's view is a situation that is extremely common. This may be a reading program, but it happens when we implement foster care programs. I've worked in that field. It happens when we implement social welfare programs. I've worked in those fields on improvement. And it happens when we're working in secondary mathematics or middle school social studies. It happens over and over and over again. And all that's happening here is that a program that in fact has demonstrated that it can work has done little to figure out how to make it work over and over again, and how to make it work across diverse and varied contexts. The improvement guru, W. Edwards Deming, once said, and I think it was in around 1991, that education reform is characterized by miracle goals and no methods. He did not mean in saying that there were no good ideas in education. What he meant was there's no method for implementing ideas so that they succeed, and so that they succeed over and over again, and so that they succeed from place to place to place. There's no methodology for making sure that our approaches to implementation honor diversity of the people who implement programs, diversity of the students for whom those programs are intended, diversity of the context, the schools, and other settings in which they're intending to implement them. So what I want to do is I want to spend just a few moments talking about major approaches to reform, major approaches to improvement over the last 50 years in education. And the first of these is what we could call performance management, or in other places, they refer to it as the accountability movement. In the accountability movement, what we did, and in some places continue to do, under the guidance of people who believe that all that's missing in education is accountability, is we set targets, we create incentives, some might say rewards and punishments, but we create incentives, we collect data, we analyze it, sometimes we build dashboards, and we hold people accountable for performance. That's the basic logic, the basic formulation of an accountability approach to making change happen, to making improvement happen. And there are some good things that came of the accountability movement. First of all, it shifted our focus towards data and the use of data. Some might say it was a lot of anguish in order to do just that, but it did that. Secondly, it put outcomes on the map. It put outcomes sort of front and center, which I think was a very good thing. We all think, probably, I hope, was a very good thing, to begin to care about outcomes for students and put that in the first position, as opposed to earlier accountability, earlier measurement and reform systems that looked at processes or inputs. It called the question of outcomes for the first time, and that's a good thing. But here's the problem with the accountability approach to drive change. If you believe that all that is needed is to set targets, measure outcomes, publish results, and the system will get better, then you must also believe one other thing, at least it seems to me. You must also believe that the folks in the system know how to do better, could be doing better, but for some reason are just choosing not to do better. And if we just have accountability, all of that would change. And I want you to know that I very strongly believe that that logic is flawed. It's immutable, meaning there's no other way for accountability to work than to buy into that logic, but it's wrong. I know people who don't have the resources to do better. I know people who don't have contexts in which it's possible to do better. I even know people, and we need to name, we need to face this. I even know people who don't know how to do better. And that characterizes part of the real problem if you want to just study the problem and understand it well enough to make improvement happen. I know people who don't know how to do better, but I don't know anybody who knows how to do better, has what it takes to do better, and is choosing not to do better. I no longer have any patience with folks who suggest that accountability is all that's missing in the education system. What next? Well, next up was what we refer to as the evidence-based practice movement, or something we're living with still, actually, the so-called research-proven methods or research-proven techniques. In this approach, an idea gets created, it gets prototyped and built, it gets designed, fine-tuned, and ready for testing. It goes into a randomized controlled field trial. Usually this takes about 5 years or so. It develops, in the best of cases, some evidence that it can work. That is reviewed, and the program goes into some approved list, or into, in the case of the federal government, the What Works Clearinghouse. There are incentives created, and districts are required, or at least incentivized, to use these tools. There's an expectation that the programs, or there's a necessity, I should say, that the programs get implemented with fidelity, just as they're written, and improvement happens. This has occupied our attention for 20 years almost. It's what the federal government has offered more than anything else over the last 20 years as how to make things better. And it has done some good things as well. It has indeed focused our attention on caring about the quality of the ideas and having some evidentiary basis for whether something can work, for whether something can be an improvement. But its problem is the very problem that we ran into in my opening description of the challenge of getting good ideas to work in practice. Even accepting that these are good ideas, when they get implemented in the real world, they tend never to have the kind of impacts that they demonstrated under a randomized controlled trial. And the reason for that is nothing about a randomized controlled trial teaches us how to make ideas work in practice. Nothing about our methods towards implementing ideas supports us in figuring out not just what can work, but how to make them work. And nothing in that supports us in figuring out how to make them work across multiple diverse contexts. More recent is the movement known as learning communities, or professional learning communities, PLCs, if you will. We like this movement a lot. It's a wonderful idea. The idea that good professionals can and should get together to learn from each other and with each other and through each other is a wonderful, wonderful idea, and much good can come of it. Benefits? Well, one thing for sure that's a benefit of this movement is a modest amount, but some respect at last for professionalism, and the idea that professionals know things and that those things need to be shared, and that they have a lot to offer each other. And if we make opportunities for that to happen, good is possible. That's a good thing. But the challenge of professional learning communities is that the knowledge about improvement that is learned within them tends to stay within them. They can be powerful, but the power is limited to the community itself. It's not a science and does not use usually scientific methods to develop evidence that's useful and can and is shared beyond the boundaries of the immediate community that comes together. So as a result, what we have tended to do in education, and given the pressures to make improvement happen still, and the necessity that improvement happens still, is we tend to come up with ideas. We tend to be motivated by programs or ideas of what works, and the proposition that if we just take those ideas and we put them to work, good things will happen and the system will improve at scale. We refer to this problem as solutionitis, the tendency of ideas to go around looking for places or problems to be applied to. What it leads to is a situation in which districts or organizations pursue ideas for some limited amount of time. Usually the time allocated is way too short, because usually the time is pegged to the life cycle and the life term of a superintendent or a principal, which tends to be way too short. And you get this situation where ideas are pursued for some period of time. They rarely realize their full potential, much less solve fully the problem that they are dedicated to. And then we move on from them, sort of dropping them quickly as new people show up who have to do things in their own new way. This all collectively sort of characterizes the challenges of making improvement happen at scale in education. What I want to do is invite you to just pause for a second and reflect on this question. What have your experiences been with these approaches to improving education? Have you experienced any of them? Have you watched any of them get pursued in your professional life? What was your experience with them? How well did they work? What happened to them with them and to them over time? What I'd like to ask you to do is to think about this we'll take just a minute or two, and then I'd like to ask you to drop them into chat and share with us your sense of your experience with how education has pursued improvement for close to 50 years now. Yes, I'm seeing staff buy-in. Often lack of resources, which we would think of as incomplete understanding of the problem. Yes, very good point. The whole idea of the popcorn of ideas and the addition of programs, solutionitis, more programs for problems, is that you're left with this position where they just pile up and it's impossible to do all things well. You need what we refer to as selective abandonment. We need to figure out what not to do if we're going to do something well. Okay, I want to get back to. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll make a record of these. At Carnegie, we not only lived these various approaches to reform and improvement, but we also spent close to 3 years thinking about them deeply as we set about figuring out what it is we might do that would help us to do things better. And we realized that we needed to rethink the challenge. The challenge wasn't that we needed more programs. It wasn't that we lacked for good ideas. It was, as I've said a couple of times, that we needed a methodology to implement well. We needed to figure out how to support people, and especially people at the front lines, to do their work well and to apply their energies to solving the problems that we see. In other words, we needed, first of all, to learn how to implement complex ideas effectively, meaning so that they work, reliably, so that they work over and over again, and at scale, so that they work in various places, different schools, different classrooms, with different kinds of students. In other words, in the classic 3 questions of improvement science, we need to figure out and we need to spread the knowledge about what works, for whom, and under what conditions. We need to develop a capacity within the system to learn to improve using a set of tools that could actually do this for us. And we needed to learn how to move from fidelity of implementation. If by fidelity you mean something like, or we mean something like, do exactly what we say to do, follow this script. And there have been moments of reform that have privileged fidelity of implementation. It's an entire field, by the way, the study of fidelity of implementation, because it's so strongly implied in an evidence-based approach to improvement. If you have research-proven practices, you've got to replicate those practices just so in order for the research to apply, in order for the warrant that says that they're good practices to hold up. That's fidelity of implementation. And in its worst case, or its most extreme case, it actually takes the form of what they call teacher-proof curriculum or teacher-proof programs. We don't believe in these. We don't believe in fidelity of implementation. We think we need to move from fidelity of implementation to something that we call integrity of implementation. And by integrity of implementation, what we mean is understand deeply the ideas that animate this program. Understand deeply the concepts that underlie these ideas and remain true to them while adapting practice so that it fits locally, so that it works in your context. So that if you modify, shape, practice, and are free to do that, and to test what you do, to make sure that what you do is indeed an improvement, that you're well on your way to a formula that allows us to take good ideas and adapt them to work locally and test them to make sure that they are improvements, and then to spread what we've learned from doing so to other colleagues about what works for whom and under what conditions. So we've set about the business of figuring out or studying how organizations get better at what they do. And we looked in manufacturing and business and industry. I should tell you, We have a lot of impatience with people who say to educators, you should do this because it works for the business. It works in business. But we also have impatience when we say sometimes, we can't do that because it won't work here because this is education. What we would prefer instead is to take those ideas and test them, modify them, and see how to make them work in our context. And that's the approach we took. I have a colleague who refers to this as analogic scavenging. Take the best of what you know from other places, but adapt it so that it makes sense in your context. I like the idea. I'm just from Hawaii, and in Hawaii, we have a word for this. We call this cockroaching. You go over here, you take something that's useful and important, you bring it back and you make it your own, and you make it part of your nest. And that's what we did for about 3 years as we were exploring and coming up with this improvement science, this set of ideas that we call improvement science. In addition to manufacturing and business and industry, we also looked into medicine and healthcare, social services, medicine, healthcare, and social services. And we were very encouraged that the improvement science ideas could work in education because we saw them work in healthcare, we saw them work in social services, and these are environments, many ways, not unlike education. They are highly professionalized environments. They're environments in which the practitioners, as professionals, engaged in judgment-informed decision-making, implementing complex ideas in complex contexts. That's all very similar to education and different, by the way, from manufacturing and business. We recognize that. But we saw these things working in those settings. And there's one other way in which medicine, healthcare, and social services are like education. Not only are they highly professional environments, not only do they involve complex professional judgments about complex decisions of implementation, but they also are people serving. And that's fundamentally different as well. So on the strength of all of this, we started modifying a set of ideas to form what we call an improvement science. And I want to just take you through 6 principles that characterize an improvement science. And again, I want to repeat something I said at the beginning, which is that each of these principles has behind it now a set of tools, processes, procedures that we can make available, that are available, and that you can use to put these ideas to work. At the ideas level, though, we express them in terms of 6 key principles. The first is to make the work user-centered and problem-focused. We get solutionitis when we start implementing ideas without fully understanding a problem, without knowing whether or not those ideas are even the right ones for our problem and our context. And so we spend a fair amount of time creating a problem study, a root cause analysis, as we call it, leading to a problem study, leading to the articulation of a theory of improvement, a set of factors that if we can make progress on these, we believe we will change the outcomes in the ways that we want to. And we also, in order to study the problem, need to involve users, need to engage and I have a simple definition for good partnerships. Good partnerships are based on shared aims, common values, equal power, and real work to do. That's our litmus test about being user-centered. Do we have common aims, shared values, and equal power? Do we go into them hoping and expecting to be influenced just as much as we hope and expect to influence others? And the reason why it's so important, and we emphasize this user-centeredness, and the user could be those who are impacted by the problem, just as much as it could be those who are working on the front lines with the problem, around the problem, and so on. And the reason why it's so important is the only way to fully understand a problem in a complex system, especially a complex problem in a complex system, is to know it from multiple perspectives.
Oh, Paul,
Yeah.
I think, were you meant to advance your slides? I think.
I am now. Are they advancing?
No, it's still on the pause and reflect.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I'm so sorry. I realized that your slides have
I'm
more
not sure
content.
why, because they literally are.
Maybe if you unshare and reshare again.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. Hold it. Let's do this. I am sorry to everyone. I didn't. And then thank you for stepping in. We get.
Yeah, I'm like, you're talking about the principles, and I'm pretty sure there's a slide on that. So.
Okay, share it. Share screen. Oh, this is very interesting. So for some reason, I'm going to share the whole screen because that I think is the problem. Somehow the actual PowerPoint dropped off of the option list.
Mm.
Okay, so now hopefully, can you see the whole screen?
Not yet.
Oh, it says that it is sharing. All right, I'm going back to present. Share screen. Share screen, select window or screen. I'm going to select entire screen because PowerPoint's not an option. And allow. How's that look? No?
Still, oh, there it is.
Oh.
Yep. So we just now need to go over to the PowerPoint and share it.
Okay. Everybody can see my honu, my Hawaiian
turtle?
sea turtle. I took that picture, everybody.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, so now we're just going to slide from here. All right, you should see pause and reflect.
Yep.
All right. Oh my
Perfect.
gosh. Okay, so here's where I have been.
Thank you so much.
Well, you all patiently said, huh? You see, everything I've been talking to you about, here it is, moving from fidelity of implementation to integrity of implementation. Okay. This conversation, everybody remembers this? Good. All right, here's where we are now. Problem-focused and user-centered. And the reason why it's so important to be user-centered is because no problem can ever be understood from one perspective only. Everybody has their own view of it. And as you'll see here, and as Peter Senge says, part of the problem is that each of us sees only a part, but that part is extremely compelling to each of us. So you get this situation where one person thinks that an elephant is a rope. Somebody else thinks that the elephant is a snake. Somebody else thinks it's a tree trunk. And the only way you can possibly fully understand it is to see it from multiple perspectives, especially those who suffer from the problem or who work closely with the problem. Second key principle, variability is the problem to be solved. It's not about just making things better for the mean. It's about making things better for everybody. This means that we need to not just move distributions and move the mean, but we need to change its shape. We need to actually reduce the variability so that those that are behind are actually catching up. This is the only way that gaps in performance, gaps in achievement, gaps in opportunity and accomplishment are ever fully remediated. Third key principle, we need to see the system. The system is the environment in which the problem is tolerated. I have colleagues who are fond of saying, and they're not wrong, I have colleagues who are fond of saying that often the system causes the problem, and that is absolutely true. But not always. Sometimes the system is just tolerating that problem. But always it is true that anything that's going to be a valid solution has to understand the system, because good solutions need to work, need to succeed within the systems if they're going to be improvements. So seeing the system is important. And here's a little cute reminder as to why that's important. If you don't see the system, you don't work upstream from the problems, you just work on the symptoms of the problem, and you don't change what matters most in the problem that you've got. Fourth key principle, embrace measurement. Or as we sometimes say, you cannot improve at scale what you cannot measure. This is a scientific enterprise. We are always looking for evidence, and evidence that substantiates our changes as improvements. And in order to do that, you have to measure, embrace measurement and gather evidence. You have to look at outcomes, but you also have to look at measurement for improvement is actually quite different from measurement that we're used to. It's not just measuring outcomes, it's not just publishing results, it's looking at things that at the front line people care about, the processes that they're engaged in, and the impacts of those processes. And then key principle is to learn by embracing disciplined inquiry. Disciplined inquiry can come in many different forms. One of the most common is something called the Plan, Do, Study, Act, PDSA cycle, where we iteratively test with small tests of change and then ramp up many small changes into big improvements. But we test our ideas as changes to see whether or not they are indeed improvements. And we do that using disciplined methods of inquiry so that we can speak to our colleagues and so that we can share the evidence and trust that it will be useful to them. And then lastly, organize as networks. Come together in these things that we call networked improvement communities, because carefully thought out, well-structured networks are a unique and important human architecture in which to do improvement work. So, what are these things called networked improvement communities? Well, they integrate two big ideas. First of all is the tools and technologies of improvement science, as we've been talking about them, joined to the power of networks to create these things called networked improvement communities. What are they? They are professional communities come together to focus on a well-specified common aim. And we have a very technical definition for an aim. An aim has four key components. It talks about what is to be accomplished, for or by whom, in what measure or to what degree, and by when. And to give you some idea of how specific we are about this, when we say by when, we also remind ourselves soon is not a date, more is not a number. Be clear about what's to be accomplished. This is the only way that you can both galvanize and organize a diverse network that in some instances extend across whole districts or even across whole nations or around the world into common, collaborative, and coordinated activity, is to focus on a shared common aim. They're guided by a deep understanding of the problem. We've kind of already talked about this to set the stage, the system that produces it, and a theory of improvement, a statement that says we are going to do the following because making these changes will improve the outcome, will achieve our aim. Now you get, again, organized, concerted, collaborative, and coherent action even across a broad network. It's disciplined by improvement science, as we've talked about it, and it's coordinated to accelerate because All of us can do more than any one of us can possibly do alone. So working together to test and refine interventions and share those interventions out throughout the network is an effective way to integrate good ideas into varied educational contexts. What do networks do for us? They provide an enormous source of innovation. Chances are, with a complex problem, no matter what you're working on, in a network large enough, somebody somewhere is working on it too, or has ideas about what could improve things with respect to that problem. They also provide diverse contexts in which knowledge can be gathered from testing, and good ideas can be tested across diverse contexts. Remember, going all the way back to the beginning, one of the problems in the problem statement that we set out for ourselves was that we didn't learn from diverse contexts. We didn't learn how to implement these good ideas across contexts. Networks allow us to test these ideas across diverse contexts, and therefore allows us to accelerate our learning about not just what works, but what works under what conditions. They also provide social connections to accelerate testing and spread. They allow us to see patterns that otherwise would look like they are just particular instances. If it's just the girls in my class are lagging behind, beginning in middle school, it's just me and my class and one problem. But if I see it across my district, if I see it across many districts, I come to understand that I have a problem that requires some consideration at scale. And then lastly, when you're thoughtful and careful about these networks, they provide safe environments in which professionals can come together to test ideas, succeed with some, revise others, and abandon when abandonment is called for. If others can do this, why can't we? You get a learning exchange from them. So there are 3 phases to a networked improvement community's life. This is my terrible attempt to show that they are ordered. They come in a certain order, but they're not linear and sequential. They overlap. You keep cycling back and changing and changing things over time. First of all, phase 1, in which goals are in which the key activity is to understand the problem, do root cause analysis, study the system in which the problem exists, and this culminates in the articulation of a theory of practice improvement. We call it a driver diagram. It's a way of representing a set of factors that if we can make progress on these factors, we can move the needle on our aim. Second phase is network learning, in which ideas about solutions, ideas that address and move the needles on those drivers are hypothesized, first designed and developed, they're prototyped, and then they are tested to figure out how to make them work in practice and how to make them work in practice across diverse contexts. And then lastly, once you have that knowledge about what works and how to make it work across contexts, you spread it throughout the network so that no matter who I am, I'm both contributing to the knowledge of the network by testing my own ideas and taking knowledge from the network by absorbing what others have learned. And this is how each of us working on small changes adds up to big improvement across whole systems. I'm going to skip the pause and reflect because I have one eye on the clock. I do apologize. So I want to talk about what's new in all of this and close with this thought. When improvement is pursued in this way, there are certain key things that shift in order both to enact improvement in this way and because we approach improvement in this way. We see it in improvement sciences. I see it in the work of branching minds, and I want to just make them explicit so that we can see them and know them. First of all, they represent a shift from implement fast and scale wide. This is what we do. We buy whole programs, we put them into whole school systems. We get ideas at the state level and we force them into the entire state context, It's a shift from implementing fast and scaling wide, or what some of my cynical colleagues refer to as implement fast and hope for the best, to a system in which we learn fast in order to how to implement well. So you engage in improvement science, testing ideas at a smaller scale where the cost of testing is minor. The cost of abandoning it is not great. So that allows you to adapt, adopt, or abandon these small tests of change, but to build up these tests of change into knowledge that can be used broadly and make big improvements happen. It's a shift from average effects to a focus on variability and performance. We've talked about this. I don't know that I want to or need to extend that much further, but it's the only way that equity can be achieved. And it is the way, by the way, I want to say that improvement science uniquely, you cannot possibly do improvement science well or correctly without attending to equity, because variability is right there as the number 2 core principle. It's a shift from adopting or implementing what works to adapting with integrity to make things work for you and in your context. And it's a shift from what works as the gold standard to how do we make it work over and over again as the new gold standard. It's a shift from individual autonomy as a most prized norm, whether it's because people want to work alone, which doesn't seem likely, or because our context forces people to work alone, which does seem quite likely, to one in which working together allows us to accomplish more. And lastly, and especially important to me, given a long background as a researcher, it's a shift from a world in which we divide people into those who know and those who do, those who produce knowledge and those who are supposed to use that knowledge. And yes, I'll say it out loud, and we need to face it. In that division, we also set up power dynamics and we set up status dynamics between those who know and those who do. It's a shift from that, from knowledge producers and knowledge users, to one in which all are improvers, because you cannot be an improver without being both a knowledge producer and a knowledge user. And so when we enter into partnerships with folks to work in this way, there's a humility, there's an interest in learning from every bit as much as teaching to, and as a result, a shift is made from those who know and those who do to a world in which we are all improvers together. The improvement paradigm. I'll stop there with apologies for the glitch. And I see that time is short, so I defer to my colleagues. I'm happy to take questions and answer them offline.
Yeah, there are a few questions that you and I can kind of respond to offline. Mostly though, it was just people kind of really reflecting and having this resonate with what they're experiencing on the ground. Our colleague at Branching Minds, Larissa, here at Branching Minds, we like to think we're all learning engineers. It's very similar to the we're all improvers concept. But thank you so much. This has really been wonderful. People clearly loved it from the chat. If you had a question, we'll definitely follow up with you after this. But thank you so much for your time. This has been really wonderful and a great way to kind of set up the rest of our day too. And so Maureen's going to come back on for a few housekeeping items.
Thank you, Eva. And Dr. LeMahieu, thank you once again to you. What a wonderful way to start the day. I think you are a delight to spend time with and have such an approachable way of talking through a concept that can feel intimidating or complex. So thank you. This has been a great way to kick off our second main event day of the summit.